Hi, I'm Sharaad Kuttan. Welcome to Let's Talk, the show that tries to bring you the most important conversations in art, culture, and ideas. I'm very happy to have as my guest today at the Gerak Budaya bookstore in Petaling Jaya, Faisal Tehrani. He's the name that needs no introduction in many ways, and he's just come out with a compilation of essays called Sastra Adalah Makanan Anjing, or Literature is Dog Food. And depending on your sensibilities and your culinary taste, this is either a good or bad thing. I don't know. Faisal, tell us, intriguing, book title, Literature is Dog Food. Why? Why literature is dog? Why is literature dog food?
I think because of, it's been a very difficult year for me. Years for me, because of I am the most banned writer in Malaysia. I have 7 books banned, and there's no help, no assistance by so-called writers, other writers, literary figures, literature organization. So I was really angry at the time, and it was really frustrating. So I wrote a piece. Yeah. There's a story of it.
Okay.
Story of it. Yeah.
So many of the essays here are reactions to things that were happening in Malaysia, and
Yeah.
I think, and because it covers a couple of years, right? So for somebody coming to this collection, how should they read it? Because if it's not really what is current now, what kind of things can they distill from it? How did you write those essays that they still remain fresh and relevant, reading it today rather than the time in which you wrote them?
I think it's still relevant because when I wrote these essays, compiled in this book, it was during pre-Pakatan Harapan days, and there are so many problems quite similar before and after pandemic, before and after Pakatan Harapan. For example, racism, feudalism, for example, and others, So, but my approach is, looking at historical facts, historical incidents, episodes, and try to relate it with the current situation. So I do think that somehow it's really relevant, and it's also important for us to look back, actually, what make us today, So that's why I do think that this compilation of essays are still will connect you not only to the present but also to the past.
Yeah. I'm very interested in the question of translation and the issues that, in many ways, we all know that Malaysians are kind of in linguistic silos. Most of us read in one language primarily, and then maybe if we are adventurous, we stray away from those silos and read in other languages. When you write in Malay, do you find that your audience largely is narrowed down? You to a Malay reading audience, that you can't break through somebody who is primarily an English reader like myself. What for you would be the issues there? Wanting to reach out to, say, English reading public.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. But it depends on the genre, I think. For the genres like short stories, poems, or novels, my works concentrate on the genre are primarily, concentrate on Malay readers, But for the essays, I receive quite overwhelmingly non-Malays readers. When I say non-Malays, like the non-Malay speaking readers, They tend to read stuff in English, like yourself. But whenever I write essays, there are so many, I capture so many non-Malay audience. They keep writing to me, emails, giving feedbacks and stuff. Because I think essays are more current. We have to admit that not everybody really into literature, but people can read 800 words to 1,200 words of small essays, articles that relate to their experience. So I do get a lot of feedbacks, comments from the non-Malays, and also that I noticed that, you know, I have sort of like three phases of writing career. The first one is when I was like really during my school and university days. I mean, like I was molded into this so-called template, Dewan Bahasa and Pustaka template, becoming poster boy of Malay literature. And there was during the time that I met you. I mean, like I still remember that. But then the second phase is I've been sucked into this so-called establishment where I started writing on so-called real Malay literature. When I say real Malay literature, it means that it's so thick with Islamic literature elements, yeah. And then I lost quite amount of non-Malay readers compared to the first phase. Suddenly, it's disappeared. And then when I got vilified, I became accidental human rights defender back in 2009. I started writing essays, articles. Suddenly, I gained back those readers, those audience. So my perspective is that since I stopped writing loaded with stuffs with Islamic elements, I gained back all this comfortably non-Malay readers, which is, I think, very important.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I mean, you mentioned one very simple fact that, you know, you're writing an essay, it's shorter, it's less of a commitment, right, to any reader, whether they are comfortable in language or not. But if they're less comfortable in, say, with reading Malay, then a short Malay essay might actually be quite accessible to them, right? I mean, just because of that. And I think there's also something, I mean, you mentioned, you know, returning to this kind of writing, which is some of the titles that you give your works really do jump out. And one of the things that I noticed a couple of months ago was that Cina Gemuk Belakang Rumah. Okay. And I remember I was just struck by the title and thought, oh, you know, I must read this. So it's quite interesting that you, I think maybe, you know, I don't know if this is true, seek to provoke as well. I mean, you seek to kind of get everybody's attention. There's a bit of anger in your writing and the things that you speak about. I know the work that you do in human rights. Is that what's driving you to write these days? You know, your sense of outrage or anger at what's happening in Malaysian society?
Yeah, in a way, yes. Most probably because you know, my mentor was Shahnun Ahmad, National Laureate, who infamously wrote Shade, the satire. So when I was his master student back then, back in 1997, 1998, when he published it. Actually, not many people knew that I the one who gave the title Shade. Because I was living with him at the time for almost 2 years. I mean, like when I was writing my master thesis, he has this other word for that title, for the manuscript at that time. I said that, wow, that's too much. I said, why don't we just give it, I mean, Shade, I said. I still remember that. So I think that I inherited, I mean, his anger, his passion, perhaps, or his obsession towards what's happening in the society.
Right, because if I remember correctly, the novel was a kind of metaphor or an extended allegory about Malaysian society under the kind of later part of the Dr. Mahathir years. Is that correct?
Yes, his political leadership. Political leadership. This was Mahathir 1.0, obviously. So yeah, other than that, I'm also a sociologist. I think my academic discipline really contribute this, I mean, background of these essays, because I do read stuff, sociological stuff, and I do think that I want to give solutions to the society. But also, I'm also a writer and a literary writer. So these, I think, elements, these two components, two aspects actually colored me, which give you sastra dalam makanan anjing. I mean, facts and fictions and sort of sometimes here and there magic realisms and narrative a prosaic kind of retelling of what happening inside our society. So I think it's sort of like documenting not only the situation outside historically, but also documenting part of my inner thoughts. Yeah.
Do you are you concerned that anger as an emotion or the kind of motivation for limits you? I mean, do you feel that at some point you want to graduate from that anger into something else, or is Malaysia still not at that point where you feel then there needs to be a change in tone of your writing? That perhaps today more than ever there needs to be outrage and anger.
Well, actually, anger is a good motivation if we channel it to a good premise, a platform, which is actually can bring change. We've did that before, and I do think that Malaysians can do it again, yeah, again and again. And we didn't really channel those anger at the time into something destructive, damaging. So I do think that anger can be a very good motivation. And like me, I mean, like for example, I mean, anger really motivates me to write. I mean, like every time I wake up, I read cases. I mean, it's quite depressing, of course. I do think that now, how do I help them? I mean, how do I channel? I mean, these grievances, these stories, this anger. I mean, I share them. So I do believe that I think I need to channel it to bring it out, to take it to other society. Not really because...
Do you feel you're alone as a writer in that? I mean, are there many writers, producing material in the same vein that you are?
Yeah, the younger writers, I mean, they do write. I mean, like nowadays there are so many sort of like private blogs. I mean, like they get small funding here and there, and they do pay to the younger writers. And I realize actually that they do also bring out their anger, yeah, as motivation, their grievances, which is actually, I do think it's good because. Or else we keeping it and not expressing it at all. So it won't be really really nice, really good for us. Yeah, I do think that there are younger other writers that are doing it also.
Okay, we'll take a short break. We'll take a short break, and we'll be back with more on Let's Talk. Hi, and welcome back to Let's Talk. I'm Sharaad Kuttan. With me, Faisal Tehrani, the author of this collection of essays, Sastra Adalah Makanan Anjing, which is, literature is dog food, for those who need a translation. And also this novel of his, which was translated into English, The Professor. Maybe we could spend a bit of time talking about your evolution as somebody working in literature, and maybe we could start with the latest, I guess, The Professor. Is it your latest novel, right? What's the story and what's so controversial about? Because I know you seem to be surrounded by controversy. It seems to follow you everywhere you go, Faisal.
I think The Professor is about a professor working on human rights. And apparently, she is a little bit different in her sexual orientation. So this novel actually discusses about gender and sexuality, and also discuss on human rights, actually cultural relativism versus universalism, with Asian values and what is Western values, and stuff like that. I mean, like I'm challenging this notion that human rights actually Western values. I mean, my point is that human rights is actually a universal one, and it's also, I mean, the Malay society, I mean, the Oriental society, people also do have their own set of human rights standards, what I call traditional human rights, and what, I mean, it's evolving, I mean, from these traditional human rights into modern human rights. Yeah.
Well, why would you put a position like that, which is already difficult enough to promote? And we've had, I think, over the years in Malaysia, many people who've tried to knock back the idea of universalism. Quite famously, Chandra Muzaffar many years ago in a Vienna conference, I think Human Rights Conference, also tried to draw a distinction between what he thought was Western and what was Asian in terms of human rights. And why would you put that argument in the body of a person already, in some sense, at the margins of society? Somebody who is, whose sexuality makes them a minority. Would that be, if you're trying to persuade, as it were, your reader of the position, wouldn't it have been easier to put that voice in somebody who was much more traditional and conventional in their own person?
Well, during my second phase of writing career, as I've told you that I've been a little bit, not a little bit, I mean like quite conservative. I've been promoting cultural relativism. I mean, I do believe in human rights, but from the perspective of cultural relativism. I mean, something like, I mean, the stuff that you mentioned earlier. So, but it's also a process of transition. As I told you that back then in 2009, I suddenly became a human rights defender, accidental human rights defender. Suddenly I got trainings from Dublin, Stockholm, Geneva, London. So all these settings are also in this book. Berlin, for example.
And this had to do with the Shia community?
Yeah,
yes, specifically, right?
Sort of like the minorities came to me to ask for my help. I mean, like asking my help, and then I get into trouble. Yeah, and because I do think that when people come to me to ask help, it's my responsibility as a writer to help them. And after that, I mean, like I get mingled around with the LGBTIQ2S activists, and they also say the same thing. I mean, like perhaps you can use your voice, I mean, your writings also to help us, to assist us. I mean, to get our view. I mean, and also it's all this book is also about dialogues. I mean, here in Malaysia, the thing is that when we sit down for a dialogue, we debate, and we tend to, to get who's going to champion this on this issue. I mean, dialogue is not like that. Dialogue is, to make sure that you understand the other side. I mean, like to understand their perspective. This is really important. I mean, we don't have enough dialogue in Malaysia. So this book is about dialogue, about the past and the future and the current situation. I mean, how are we should bridge ourselves in the society. So this is really important, I mean, the theme. Yeah.
I mean, it's very interesting that you bring up dialogue, and I agree with you that there is a kind of intellectual responsibility on the part of someone entering into dialogue to be open, which is just not say, I'm starting with a position and I'm going to end with the same position, right? I must be open to the possibility of change in my own intellectual outlook. Do you think over the last 20, 30 years, as you've been writing, that you see that Malaysians, by and large, are open to rethinking or thinking anew, which makes your work impactful, right? Because as a writer, you seek to kind of transform people, not just to have people or cheerlead for one side against the other, right? Do you see a transformation in Malaysian society? Has it gotten worse?
It's possible. I mean, I was, I graduated as an Islamic studies student, back in I'm from Malaya University, Academy Pengajian Islam, and I was from the religious school, called Islam Kelang. I do believe in cultural relativism, position of Malay supremacy, stuff like that. Once. But then I can change because of dialogues. I'm open to possibilities. When I started researching on cultural relativism, like universalism, stuff on human rights, for example, I found stuff like Tafsir Nurul Ihsan. This is the only Malay exegesis coming from this region. And this particular Malay exegesis tafsir stating that it's okay for you to convert to another religion, to another faith, which is actually quite something really explosive, yeah.
Right.
And this book was published back in before 1920, before First World War, and he's not even from kaum muda. So and then I started reading on the Malay pantones and the Malay shairs and other traditional works, and I found that the Malays are not like this before, and suddenly I also joined Institute of Malay World and Civilization, which is actually give me more chances for me to relook at my point of view, my previous point of view. And so it's possible for me to transform. So this book is actually a process of transition of myself from A to B, yeah? From this point to another point. So I think it's possible to do that.
Okay, you pose a very interesting problem for us who know the Malay language, but then often seduced into reading the English version, because I remember trying to read Pramodya's Bumi Manusia, and in Bahasa Indonesia, and it was so difficult for me, and I had to keep going to the glossary, that I just thought, okay, I'll just read the English version. I mean, how would you advise Malaysians who understand and can read the Malay language, but now that there is an English version of your book, which should they read?
Well, the Malay version is only available on an ebook by Buku Fiksi, but the English version is The Professor, which is actually, of course, I mean the Malay edition is, I mean, like coming genuinely from me, yeah. And when you have another version of translated version, it's always a sort of like a rewriting process. I mean, I'm working together with a translator. But Bridget Bresson, she is actually married to a Malay, and so she do understand a Malay mind, and she really captures actually, in a way, not just Malay minds, also the Malay phrases, yeah, Malay Western Shang way of thinking. And I do believe that it's sort of like equal for you to read the English version and the Malay version. It's almost sort of like equal. But only that the translated edition is like quite reminding you, I mean, page after page, that this is actually a translation work. I mean, I think for all translation works, I mean, like, we tend to have that feeling. I mean, this is sort of like translated.
So maybe have both versions. Get the ebook as well as the English translation. Because and I love the cover. It's a beautiful cover.
Yeah.
Okay, in the last minute that we have, Faisal, tell us about your next project. I mean, you just come out with this. This is also quite a hot off the press, as it were. What are you working on next?
I've written a satire, but I think it's quite difficult to be published because it's a satire. It's a political satire. It's also about a pandemic, Koro pandemic. I think the audience can just Google Koro. What does it mean? Koro.
Okay, so is that the one where people get a disease because they eat each other's brains? Or the brains of the dead? No,
it's not. It's not related to zombie.
Okay.
It's challenged many ways. I mean, our point of view, Malay point of view, a Malaysian point of view. I'm not sure whether it can be published in Malay. But Bridget Bresson is now doing the translation of it in English. Perhaps it's going to be published in English first, and then comes the Malay version. I do hope that it's going to be published outside. First, I mean, like, I'm doing the Zhang Yimou approach. Zhang Yimou, I mean, the famous Chinese director. I mean, like, he tend to show all his films outside first, and then coming back to China. So, yeah.
Well, hopefully your book won't be censored. I look for a time when they unban your books as well, Faisal. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Sharaad. Yeah.
That's all we have for you this week. I've been speaking to Faisal Tehrani, the author of The Professor, and also this collection of essays, Sastra Adalah Makanan Anjing, or Literature is Dog Food. All of it available at the Gerak Budaya bookstore in Petaling Jaya. That's all I have for you this week. I'm Sharaad Kuttan, only for Astro AWANI.